What would you do if the most dangerous predator cubs in the galaxy chose you as their pillow? And moving even an inch could trigger their mother's hunting instincts. Lieutenant Commander Kira Valdrin had studied humans for 7 years. She had memorized their combat statistics, analyzed their territorial expansion across 3 star systems, and written her doctoral thesis on their capacity for calculated violence. But nothing in her research could have prepared her for what she witnessed that day on the forest moon of HFY, when a single human soldier did the impossible and made her question everything she thought she knew about his species. The morning had started routinely enough. Kira adjusted her scanner as she trekked through the phosphorescent undergrowth, her platinum-silver hair catching the bioluminescent light that filtered through the canopy above. The Galactic Union had assigned her to document the native wildlife before terraforming negotiations began, a task she took seriously despite knowing most of her colleagues considered it busy work. Her pointed ears twitched at every sound, a biological gift from her Valorian ancestry that made her an excellent field researcher. The jungle hummed with life around her, clicks and whistles and the distant roar of something she preferred not to identify. That's when she heard the human. Or rather, that's when she heard the absence of the human. Her scanner had picked up a heat signature 200 meters ahead, tagged as Sergeant Marcus Cole, one of the human security personnel assigned to protect the research team. But he wasn't moving. Hadn't moved in over 3 hours, according to her readings. Kira felt her stomach tighten. HFY was home to the Ravnak apex predators that could take down a full-grown Craxian bull in under 30 seconds. Their cubs were born with claws that could slice through standard armor plating. If a Ravnak had gotten to the human, she needed to report it immediately. She needed to stay away, stay safe, follow protocol. Instead, she found herself moving toward him, each step careful and quiet, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. What she found in that clearing would haunt her for the rest of her life, though not in the way she expected. Sergeant Marcus Cole sat with his back against a fallen tree, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands resting motionless on his thighs. He was alive, she could see that from the subtle rise and fall of his chest, but he was frozen in place, with an expression of intense concentration on his weathered face. And on his head, curled into a pile of silver-gray fur on top of his wide-brimmed tactical hat, were 3 Ravnak cubs, sleeping. Kira's breath caught in her throat. She had studied Ravnak behavior extensively. The cubs were perhaps 3 weeks old, still in their vulnerable phase, when they sought warmth and comfort wherever they could find it. They must have wandered away from their mother while she hunted, stumbled upon the strange warmth of the human, and decided he made an acceptable temporary den. Any movement from Cole, any sudden noise or vibration, would wake them. And if they woke distressed, if they cried out, their mother would come. A fully grown female Ravnak protecting her young was a force of nature that even armored vehicles couldn't reliably survive. Cole knew this. He had to know this. His training would have covered the local fauna in detail. Yet there he sat, perfectly still, barely breathing, with 3 furry bundles of eventual death sleeping peacefully on his hat. Kira's analytical mind immediately began calculating. He could call for extraction. His cum unit was right there on his shoulder. He could signal for armed backup, have the cubs tranquilized and removed. He could even, she realized with a cold shock, simply stand up quickly and run. The cubs would wake, yes, but he was close enough to the research compound that he might make it to safety before the mother arrived. So why wasn't he doing any of those things? Why was he just sitting there, letting wild animals use him as furniture? She watched from behind a thick fern, too confused to announce her presence, too curious to leave. Minutes passed. The jungle sounds continued around them, indifferent to the strange tableau. One of the cubs shifted in its sleep, making a small mewling noise, and Kira saw Cole's face tighten almost imperceptibly with tension. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The cub settled back down, and only then did he allow himself a slow, silent exhale. This is insane, Kira thought. He's risking his life for no tactical advantage. There's no strategic reason to stay still. These animals won't remember his kindness. They won't become allies. In a few months, they'll be fully grown predators that would kill him on sight. What is he doing? But even as she formed the questions, something in her chest was doing something strange. Something that felt almost like warmth. She found herself settling down into a crouch, then slowly lowering herself to sit on the mossy ground, content to simply watch. An hour passed. Then another. Kira's legs cramped, but she didn't move. She told herself it was scientific observation. She told herself she needed to document this for her research. She told herself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The real truth was simpler and more confusing. She couldn't look away from his face. There was something in his expression she had never seen in a human before. Not the cold calculation of a soldier. Not the aggressive determination of a conqueror. It was something softer. Something that reminded her of her grandmother on Valoria. The way she used to hold injured animals in her garden, speaking to them in gentle tones even though everyone knew they would probably die. It was tenderness. Pure, unguarded, utterly irrational tenderness. The Galactic Union classified humans as a class for threat species. Their capacity for violence was well documented. Their history was written in blood, their expansion across the stars marked by countless conflicts. But this human, this soldier trained for combat, was holding perfectly still because 3 small creatures were comfortable on his head. Because waking them might frighten them. Because he had apparently decided their peaceful sleep was worth more than his own safety. Kira didn't realize she was crying until a tear landed on her scanner screen. Around the 4-hour mark, the jungle shifted. Kira felt it before she heard it. A heaviness in the air, a sudden silence from the smaller creatures that had been chittering in the trees. Her blood turned to ice as a shape emerged from the undergrowth on the far side of the clearing. The mother Ravnak was everything the research files had described, and somehow more. She stood over 2 meters at the shoulder, her sleek gray body rippling with muscle beneath fur that shifted colors with the dappled light. Her eyes, all 6 of them, locked onto Marcus Cole with an intensity that made Kira want to run and never stop running. Cole didn't move. Kira saw his jaw tighten, saw the tendons in his neck stand out as he forced himself to remain absolutely still. The mother Ravnak prowled closer, her massive head lowering to sniff the air. She could smell her cubs, Kira knew. Could probably smell the human's sweat, his fear, the adrenaline flooding his bloodstream. One wrong move and she would strike. One sign of aggression toward her sleeping young, and Marcus Cole would be dead before his body hit the ground. What happened next defied everything Kira thought she understood about predator behavior. Cole, very slowly, closed his eyes. It was the most vulnerable thing he could have done. He was deliberately making himself defenseless, showing the mother predator that he posed no threat to her children. He was trusting an alien animal, a creature with no concept of mercy or gratitude, to recognize his intent. He was insane. He was the bravest person Kira had ever seen. The mother Ravnak circled him twice, her breath hot enough that Kira could see it, disturbing the leaves near Cole's feet. Then she did something that made Kira question the accuracy of every scientific paper she had ever read. She lay down, right there, 3 meters from the human. The apex predator of THESERA 7 settled onto her haunches and began grooming herself, occasionally glancing toward her sleeping cubs with what could only be described as maternal satisfaction. She had accepted him. Kira didn't know how, didn't understand the mechanism or the evolutionary reasoning, but somehow the Ravnak mother had looked at the strange, still creature and decided he was not a threat. Perhaps she recognized something in his posture, his stillness, his refusal to panic. Perhaps she could sense the genuine care radiating off him like heat. Or perhaps the universe was stranger than any of them imagined. Another hour passed. The largest of the cubs began to stir, stretching its tiny limbs and yawning to reveal needle-sharp teeth. It blinked its 3 eyes open, seemed momentarily confused by the strange warm surface beneath it, then let out a small chirp of recognition toward its mother. The other awoke shortly after, tumbling off Cole's hat in a heap of fur and tiny claws. They bounded toward their mother, who greeted them with low, rumbling sounds that vibrated through the ground. Kira watched, transfixed, as the family unit reunited. The mother nudged each cub in turn, sniffing them thoroughly, presumably checking for injuries or unusual scents. Then, in a fluid motion that seemed impossible for a creature her size, she gathered all 3 into her grasp and turned toward the deeper jungle. But before she disappeared into the undergrowth, she paused. She looked back at Marcus Cole, who had finally allowed himself to move, rolling his stiff neck with a grimace of discomfort. Their eyes met across the clearing, human and alien predator, sharing a moment that no scientific instrument could quantify. Then she was gone, her cubs with her, leaving nothing but disturbed leaves and a lingering warmth in the air. Cole sat there for a long moment, just breathing. Then he reached up, took off his hat, and looked at it with an expression of bemused wonder. When he laughed, quiet and genuine, Kira felt something shift permanently in her chest. She stood up without thinking, without considering how her sudden appearance might startle him, and stepped into the clearing. Cole's hand went to his sidearm by instinct, then relaxed when he recognized her uniform. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Didn't know I had an audience." Kira opened her mouth to respond, to ask him why, to demand an explanation for behavior that made absolutely no sense from any tactical or survival standpoint. Instead, what came out was, 5 hours. You sat there for 5 hours. Cole shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at muscles stiff from prolonged stillness. They were comfortable. His answer was so simple, so completely inadequate, that Kira felt a flash of frustration. "Do you understand what could have happened?" she demanded, moving closer without realizing it. "The mother Ravnak could have killed you, should have killed you, according to every behavioral model we have. Why would you risk your life for 3 animals that mean nothing to you?" Cole looked at her then, really looked, with eyes that held depths she hadn't expected. "They didn't mean nothing to me," he said quietly. "They were scared and cold and looking for safety. They found it in a dumb human wearing a hat that probably smelled like protein bars and sweat." He paused, his weathered face softening. "I couldn't take that away from them, you know? I couldn't be the thing that taught them the universe is cruel." Kira stared at him. She had spent years studying humans, cataloging their behaviors, trying to understand the species that had exploded across the galaxy in a single generation. She had theories about their aggression, their resilience, their terrifying capacity for both creation and destruction. But she had never considered that the same creatures who had fought their way across star systems might also sit perfectly still for 5 hours because baby animals needed somewhere warm to sleep. "Is that why you humans are so dangerous?" she heard herself ask. "Because you can be this gentle and still survive in a galaxy that punishes gentleness?" Cole considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we're dangerous because we choose when to be gentle." He reached down to pick up his hat, brushing off the silver fur that clung to it. "My grandmother used to say that strength isn't about never being soft. It's about being soft when you can and hard when you must." She said, "The measure of a soul is in the choosing." Kira felt the words settle into her like stones into still water. She thought about her research, her papers, her carefully constructed models of human behavior. All of it suddenly seemed inadequate, incomplete. How could you capture this in a dataset? How could you quantify the moment a soldier chose to become a pillow for predator cubs? "Your grandmother sounds wise," she said finally. Cole smiled, and it transformed his face from weathered soldier to something unexpectedly warm. She was. He looked at her more closely, seeming to really see her for the first time. "Those ears aren't just decorative, are they? You're Valorian. You heard the whole thing." "All 5 hours," Kira admitted. "I was too confused to leave. I couldn't understand what you were doing. And now? Now I understand even less," she said, "but somehow that feels correct. Some things aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be witnessed." Cole laughed again, that same quiet, genuine sound that did strange things to her equilibrium. "You're pretty philosophical for a field researcher." They walked back toward the compound together, falling into step naturally, despite the height difference. Kira found herself asking questions she hadn't planned about his grandmother, about Earth, about why humans seemed incapable of leaving anything alone. Cole answered with stories, funny and sad, and sometimes both, painting a picture of a species that was exactly as contradictory as she had always suspected, but in ways she had never imagined. By the time the compound came into view, she had revised her entire understanding of humanity. Not because of data or analysis, but because of one man, one hat, and 3 sleeping cubs. The story spread, of course. Stories like that always do. Within a week, every species on the research team had heard some version of what Sergeant Marcus Cole had done. The Craxians didn't understand it, viewing the behavior as dangerously irrational. The Thessalites found it amusing, a typical example of mammalian sentimentality. But the Valorians understood. Kira's people had always believed that the soul of a being was revealed not in their greatest triumphs, but in their smallest kindnesses. Cole had passed a test he didn't know he was taking. 3 months later, when the terraforming negotiations fell apart and violence seemed inevitable, it was Kira who proposed the alternative. She stood before the Galactic Council with her research. But it wasn't the behavioral data that changed minds. It was the story. She told them about the clearing, the cubs, the mother Ravnak, and the human who had remained still, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Humanity, she argued, could not be understood through their capacity for violence alone. They were a species capable of choosing tenderness when it cost them everything. They were dangerous, yes, but not in the way the council feared. They were dangerous in the way a parent is dangerous, a protector, a guardian, a force that could level mountains to keep something small and precious safe. The HFY Accord was signed a week later, the first human council treaty negotiated through understanding rather than force. Kira received commendation for her role, but she knew who really deserved the credit. She found Cole on the observation deck that night, looking out at the stars with the same expression he had worn in the clearing. His hat sat on the railing beside him, still bearing the faint marks of tiny claws. "I heard about the accord," he said, without turning. "They're saying you saved the negotiations." She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I just told them the truth," she said. "You did the hard part." Cole shook his head. "I just sat still." "Anyone could have done that." "No," Kira said softly. "They couldn't. I've studied dozens of species. I've observed thousands of individuals across the galaxy. Not one of them would have made the choice you made. Not one of them would have seen those cubs and thought, their comfort matters more than my safety." "It wasn't about comfort," Cole said, turning to look at her. His eyes reflected the starlight, deep and warm. "It was about showing them that not everything in the universe wants to hurt them. That sometimes, you can trust a stranger. That sometimes, the scary thing, sitting too still in the forest, is actually just an idiot who doesn't want to wake the babies." Kira laughed, surprising herself. The sound echoed across the empty observation deck, and Cole's smile widened at it. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Humans aren't what I expected." "We get that a lot," he said. "Usually right before people either want to fight us or understand us." "Which category do I fall into?" Kira felt her ears flush slightly, a Valorian tell she had never learned to control. "I think you're something new," she said. "A third category I didn't know existed." Cole raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Someone worth knowing," she said simply. The stars wheeled above them, indifferent and ancient, but in that moment, the universe felt smaller, warmer, full of possibilities that no scanner could measure and no research paper could capture. Kira thought about the cubs, probably grown now into young predators learning to hunt. She wondered if they remembered the strange, warm stillness that had sheltered them on that first frightened day away from their mother. She wondered if somewhere in their alien minds, there was a template marked safe that matched the shape of a human soldier sitting perfectly still beneath them. Probably not, she decided. Memory didn't work that way for most species. But she would remember. The council would remember. History would remember. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the point wasn't whether the cubs understood what Marcus Cole had given them. Perhaps the point was that he gave it anyway. Asking nothing in return, expecting nothing. Simply being the kind of person who would let predator cubs sleep on his hat because they needed somewhere warm, and he had warmth to give. That, Kira realized, was what made humans dangerous. Not their weapons. Not their resilience. Not their capacity for violence. It was this, their absolute, stubborn, gloriously irrational insistence on being kind, even when it cost them, even when no one was watching, even when the universe itself seemed designed to punish softness. They were impossible, infuriating, wonderful beyond any model or analysis or scientific understanding. And Kira, standing beside one of them as the stars turned overhead, couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. 6 months later, she submitted her resignation from the Galactic Research Council. The letter was short, citing personal reasons and a change in career direction. What it didn't mention was the small research outpost she and Marcus had been approved to establish on Thesera 70's surface, a joint human-Valorian project dedicated to documenting and protecting the moon's native wildlife. It didn't mention the hat that now hung on the wall of their shared quarters, preserved behind glass like the precious artifact it was. It didn't mention the way her heart still stuttered every time she caught Marcus being impossibly, wonderfully, stubbornly kind. Some things she had learned couldn't be captured in official documentation. Some things were meant to be lived rather than studied. And some things, like the bond forged in a clearing between a soldier and 3 sleeping cubs, didn't need to be explained to be understood. They simply were. That was enough.